Welcome back to the deep dive. Get ready, because we're stepping into a world most people never saw, even when they were living right next to it.
That's right.
Today, we're taking an extraordinary look inside the darkest corners of Tokyo in the late 19th century.
Yeah, specifically the poor districts, the dense urban slums that were just rapidly forming as Japan hurtled into the industrial age.
A hidden side of the city, really.
Absolutely. And one that tells a crucial story about this era of, immense change.
And our guide is someone truly unique, someone who chose to not just observe, but to, live among the poor.
Exactly. This deep dive is based on excerpts from a remarkable book published back in 1893, Matsubara Iwagoro's Sai Ankoku no Tokyo.
The darkest Tokyo.
Right, the darkest Tokyo. And we've also got some modern analysis of his work to draw on.
So our mission today is to explore this world through Matsubara's eyes, understand the stark reality of poverty in Meiji-era Tokyo,
and see what unexpected insights it holds for us, even now. Prepare for a view of the city that you definitely won't find in any typical history book or travel guide.
Okay, let's dive right in with the man himself, Matsubara Iwagoro. Who was he? What led him to this incredible project?
Well, he initially tried his hand as a novelist, apparently without, major success. But by the autumn of 1892, he'd pivoted and was working as a journalist for the Kokumen Shimbun newspaper.
And what was Tokyo like right then? What was the scene?
It was a time of almost dizzying transformation. Japan was shifting incredibly fast from its feudal past to a capitalist industrial future.
Which creates opportunities, sure, but also
huge social upheaval, a massive increase in income inequality and the birth of these packed urban slums in cities like Tokyo and Osaka.
You see that contrast everywhere, don't you? On one hand, places like the Rokumeikan,
symbols of Western luxury, elite society, all balls and champagne.
And then just around the corner, Matsubara is seeing rising rice prices and people literally facing starvation.
Exactly. And he was already talking with friends, intellectuals, about the darkness of life in other big cities, London, Paris, places in Germany, Russia.
Thinking about poverty. Strikes.
Right, the roots of it all. And seeing Tokyo developing its own intense contradictions firsthand, that really sparked something in him.
And this spark led him to do something pretty radical, didn't it? He didn't just report from the outside.
No, and that's what makes his work so extraordinary. He made the decision to go completely undercover.
Wow.
Disguised himself as a poor wanderer, totally concealing his identity as a journalist. His belief was, to truly understand, he had to experience it.
He even gave it a name, right? His dark university curriculum.
He did, and his goal was incredibly ambitious. Live among the poor for over 500 days, changing jobs 30 different times to see all these different facets of life.
That's commitment.
And his preparation wasn't reading books. It started with days of intentional starvation, nights sleeping rough.
Just to feel a tiny fraction of it.
Exactly, just to get a taste of what the poor experience daily. This kind of immersive undercover reporting, senyu reportage, it was truly pioneering for its time.
So just picture this educated journalist deliberately starving himself, putting on worn clothes, and arriving in a dense poor district. He describes getting there in late September, still hot, in the area connecting Shitaya Yamabushicho, Manincho, Kamiyoshicho. What did he see? What did it feel like?
He paints this incredibly vivid picture. You see this stream of laborers, street vendors coming home after a long day.
Exhausted, I imagine.
Totally. Carrying their tools, pickaxes, lunch boxes, their clothes soaked with sweat, caked in dust from the streets.
It sounds hot, dirty.
Oh, absolutely. And you see all the different types. Day laborers, maybe they earned 18 sen that day, shiriki pulling heavy carts, young girls carrying shamisen, old men selling really humble things like rake handles or repairing clogs, scrap pickers digging through trash. He even mentions these tired-looking child performers, echigojishi, dragging their feet home.
But despite the grime and the heat, was there a sense of life there?
Yes, he does note the atmosphere is busy, chaotic, but there's also this palpable sense of community among the workers coming back.
Right.
Temporary stalls pop up, selling the absolute bare essentials at the cheapest prices possible. Leftover fish, bruised veggies, pickles, cheap yakitori, used clogs, rags, junk. It's this whole microeconomy built on the fringes.
And his first lesson at this dark university, it starts that very night, right? He finds a kitchenyado.
A cheap lodging house, yeah. And this is where his preparation immediately hits reality, hard.
How so?
He describes it as a mixture cave, Incredibly cramped, deeply unsanitary. He's immediately attacked by fleas, mosquitoes. The stench, he says it's overwhelming, from accumulated dirt and body odor.
Just one lamp.
Single flickering tin lamp lighting the whole place. It sounds almost unbearable.
Who was staying there?
A real mix. Traveling merchants, performers passing through, pilgrims, day laborers, rickshaw pullers, and all their meager stuff, toolboxes, umbrellas, staffs just piled up, really emphasizing how little space there was.
And he shares these specific moments, doesn't he? Like people sleeping shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, one guy shaving by the dim lamplight, and an old man selling sweets who was just calmly crushing lice on his own body.
Oh, wow. The lice thing really got to him, didn't it?
It clearly did. It's something he comes back to, just visceral shock. But then right alongside that, he meets this woman.
Ah, yes, the woman with the child.
Right, traveling with her husband who repaired umbrellas, living in the exact same conditions. He describes her appearance very frankly, dark skin, flat nose, thick lips, blackened teeth, but he stresses her genuine kindness.
Her lack of pretense.
Exactly. He watched her just naturally help this young laborer sew up a tear in his jacket. No fuss, just simple kindness.
So you have this contrast.
Yeah.
The revulsion at the conditions, the lice he couldn't even bring himself to touch. And then this moment of profound human connection.
Precisely. His initial confidence, thinking he was prepared, it just evaporated. The reality of sharing that tiny, dirty space, trying to sleep under torn mosquito nets, it was physically and mentally way harder than he'd anticipated. He admits the discomfort, the shock.
So realizing this first Kitchenato wasn't maybe the best place for his long-term research, he moves on, looking for deeper caves, as he called them.
Yeah, he started wandering through various small, poor districts, more on the outskirts, places like Nezumi Ashitacho, Kushikawa Yanagicho, Tsuenura, Ushigomiya Kagishita.
Systematically exploring.
Right, Ichigai Chodenjiacho too, just mapping out the city's hidden layers.
And this eventually led him to Yotsuya Samegahashi, later Wakabacho.
Which was a major poor district, even in the supposedly more upscale Yamanote area.
And here he meets another key figure, Shimizu Yahya.
Yahya, a really respected guy in Samegahashi, former construction worker, known for his compassion, kind of a local institution like a placement agency god helping people find work.
And Yahya helps Matsubara find his next job, right?
Huh.
Which leads him into the world of the leftover food shop.
Exactly. And this is where he really digs into the concept of zanpan, leftover food, or heitai meshi, soldier's meal.
Soldier's meal, because it came from barracks.
Originally, yeah. But by then it was often sourced from places like the military academy. Matsubara felt that term, leftover food, was just the most painfully accurate description of the poor situation.
How so?
It symbolized everything: their hunger and cold, the rags, the ruined houses, their whole miserable appearance.
So how did this leftover food operation actually work?
Well, they'd collect these enormous baskets and tubs of leftovers, rice, side dishes, pickles, bread scraps, fish bones, burnt rice bits.
From the academy?
Yeah, 3 times a day using carts.
Yeah.
And we're talking huge amounts, like 15 kanmei per basket. That's around 56 kilograms.
Wow, just hauling. That must have been intense labor.
Incredibly strenuous, and this food, remember, originally just trash.
Becomes valuable.
Absolutely. The shop owner would buy it incredibly cheap, maybe 50 cents for that huge 15 kanmei basket, but then they'd resell it to the poor.
At a profit.
Yeah, say 6 cents per kanmei. Matsubara reflects on this. In one way, it felt like a god of mercy, you know? Providing cheap food that rescued people from soaring costs and daily hunger.
But on the other hand, he's selling people garbage.
Yeah.
Literally.
Precisely. And he really wrestles with that. He calls his own actions a crime-deserving punishment. He knows he's part of a system profiting from desperation.
And the shop itself.
Dilapidated, propped up, leaky roof, messy yard. But it becomes this vital social hub.
He called it a poor people's club, right?
Yes. People would gather there, share stories, wait for the cart to arrive. Matsubara describes the excitement when it finally showed up.
Like waiting for a hero.
Almost. He compares it to welcoming General Grant or Fukushima Chusa back from Siberia.
Yeah.
People rushing forward with their bowls, jostling, pushing, just to buy a tiny portion for 2 or 3 cents.
And they even had slang for the different types of leftovers.
They did. Like Torinokawa tiger skin for the burnt rice crusts, Hetsui for bread crusts, Arai for rice washed from the pot bottom, Kabukiri for pickle ends.
Shows a real shared knowledge, doesn't it?
It really does. An intimate understanding within that community.
What's fascinating here is how Matsubara contrasts this system with formal charity efforts he heard about, like distributing rice.
Yeah, this is a really key insight. He talks about one effort to give away 50 koku of rice at Sengakuji Temple, which was quite far away.
So people walked for hours.
Desperate for free food, only to be given tickets. Tickets for the next day.
And his point is?
The poor can't wait. Someone's starving today and needs food today. Giving tickets for tomorrow. It's useless. He's sharply critical of the lack of understanding from the donors, however well-intentioned.
So relief needs to be direct. Immediate.
Exactly. Cooked food over uncooked rice. Food over clothes. Things people can use right now. He uses this analogy of giving a fish flopping in a dry rut some water for tomorrow. It doesn't help its immediate crisis.
He even connects this back to his own past, his student days.
Yes. He remembers participating in a mess hall rebellion at Kyochijuku where students threw food around because they were unhappy with it.
The irony.
The bitter irony. That wasteful act could have fed the very people he was now living among.
And the older residents at the shop, they had a historical perspective too.
They did. They remembered a time, maybe 20 years before, when soldier's meal was something Tokyo's poor scorned, even threw into the sea. But now
they had to buy it.
Had to buy it, desperately needed it. It just shows how much harder life had become for the lowest classes in a really short time.
So you have these traders inserting themselves, buying waste, selling it back. It prevents total waste maybe, but
it means the poor have to pay for what was originally free. Matsubara notes how economic principles had seeped into even this dark realm, turning waste into profit right off the backs of the neediest.
But the shop, despite its grim reality, was also a social center.
Kind of open forum, yeah. People shared their lives, their secrets, like the social section of a newspaper, he says. And Matsubara was there, like a secretary, quietly documenting everything.
He records some incredible anecdotes, like the leftover bentos from that school sports day.
Oh yeah, at Ayama. A law school had hundreds of leftover bentos and just gave them away to poor kids.
And the word spread.
Like wildfire. Kids were shouting, "There's a memorial service in the field." Like a call to arms. For those families, it was like a rare sigaki. You know, the Buddhist ritual of feeding hungry ghosts. It was a full day's meal.
Wow.
Even the scraps left on the field were collected by beggars afterwards. And they joked grimly, didn't they, about how prosperous they'd be if there was a war, meaning more potential leftovers.
Such a harsh reality. So after several days at the leftover shop, Matsubara moves on again.
Yeah, he gets paid a tiny wage, 25 sen, and a pair of geta. He goes back to Yahyu's lodging house, uses it as a base for a bit.
And what was that lodging house like?
He describes it as a hub for migrant workers, mostly from the Hokuriku region. They came with dreams, you know, getting steady jobs as stable hands, cooks, delivery men, or specific goals like saving money to send home, buy a bit of land.
He heard their stories.
Yeah, stories of setbacks too, losing money, fires. And Matsubara actually helped them out sometimes.
Oh.
Well, many were illiterate, so he'd write letters for them, maybe translate things. He really highlights their characters, simple, honest, focused on work and saving.
He admired them.
Clearly. He admired their quiet strength, their practical wisdom, even if their lives weren't, novel.
And then he gets another job offer through another placement agency god.
Exactly. Unexpectedly, he lands a job as a buyer at a greengrocer's shop in Shinamicho.
Shinamicho.
Yeah.
This sounds like an even deeper dive.
It really does. Matsubara seemed to consider it maybe the most impoverished district he visited, notorious for its filth, its incredibly cramped housing.
Get us a picture. What did he see there?
It's grim. Truly grim. Muddy water everywhere, dead rats just lying around, neglected toilets overflowing, decaying garbage, rotten food, fish guts just littering the street.
And the houses?
Hardly houses, more like crumbling makeshift shacks, walls patched with old rags, bits of newspaper.
And inside, tiny spaces.
Incredibly small, rarely more than 5 mats, usually just 3 mats, plus a small dirt floor area, and multiple family members crammed in there.
What about flooring? Furniture?
No proper flooring, just rough boards, maybe covered with straw mats or even old raincoats. Almost no furniture. Utensils were broken, chipped.
But there's that ingenuity again, right? Making do.
You see it constantly. He describes a cracked mortar being used as a brazier for cooking, a chipped pot patched with oiled paper to hold water, using whatever they could salvage.
What kind of work were people doing in Shinamisho?
Rickshaw pullers were the most numerous, but also day laborers, scrap buyers, repairmen, small food vendors selling things like cheap, awful skewers, entertainers, fortune tellers, masseurs, street vendors selling shellfish, secondhand stuff. And he also noted, well, petty criminals, pickpockets, snatchers, often young, agile boys. He mentions the southern part was slightly less grim than the truly destitute northern part.
And the description of the children, it's heartbreaking.
It really is, playing right there in the filth, imitating their parents' work. He mentions seeing a baby nursing on an awful skewer.
Oh my goodness.
He calls these moments pictures of their education. Just shows how deeply that environment shaped them right from the start.
Let's zoom out a bit. Looking at the overall economy of poverty he saw, beyond the shops, what other systems were crucial for buying and selling?
You see this whole ecosystem really catering just to the poor. Things like Surichi used goods auctions.
Where even broken things had value.
Yeah, a strange kind of value with their own special terminology. Then Furumono-gai, the secondhand goods buyers, street vendors themselves living really tough lives, dealing with items maybe from people who were sick or had died.
And he describes this awful process, Zashoku and Yurisoku.
Eating your savings, selling your assets. Yeah, that slow, tragic slide into complete destitution. People gradually selling off everything they owned, heirlooms, sometimes even family gravestones, just to survive another day.
Morning markets were important too, like Tacho.
Crucial. Huge amounts of produce traded there, diverse crowds, their own market slang, vital for small vendors and laborers trying to get the absolute cheapest goods. He also saw the Jumonsen Ichiba, markets for kids, cheap snacks and toys showing their own kind of ingenuity in play.
And Mushubo, the shelterless dwelling. What was that?
That referred to laborers, vendors who literally slept outdoors, or in makeshift shelters, maybe using their tools or goods as a pillow. Matsubara distinguishes them from beggars because they were still trying to survive by their own labor.
Let's talk about that labor. He spent time watching day laborers, construction workers, hayatoi, doko.
Their lives were incredibly hard, often exploited by the foremen, the hayagashira, and the contractors yukioishi who take a big cut of their already tiny wages. He shares anecdotes just illustrating the constant hardship.
And a major focus for him was the rickshaw pullers.
Yes, they were everywhere, and their struggle was intense. He breaks down the different types. Yogyo shafu doing night work, Yadoguruma living in lodging provided by the rickshaw owner.
And the oibor shafu.
The aged pullers. Yeah, their situation was particularly tough. Their bodies were giving out, but they still had to work to survive.
He calls their life the war of life.
It really was. Just too many pullers chasing too few fares, driving prices down, intense competition, especially at key spots like Ryogoku Bridge, and constant exploitation.
Even their food reflected this hardship.
Totally. Cheap, sometimes pretty unsanitary dishes. Marusan soba, Fukagawa meshi, Nakomi stews, yakitori. They ate quickly, always on the run. He even notes how the staff in these cheap eateries developed an instinct for how much a customer could actually afford.
And he includes those stark business reports, sample earnings.
Yeah, they really confirm the huge income gap and the relentless struggle, especially for the older, weaker pullers. He also notes just the sheer number of day laborers overall and how big events, like General Grant's visit or the Constitution being promulgated, offered these rare temporary boosts in work.
Matsubara also touches on the potential for unrest, doesn't he?
Yeah.
The eruption line of the lower class.
He does. He observes there aren't really organized movements yet, but he suggests that external pressures like the new trams threatening their livelihood could easily spark action. It felt volatile.
You mentioned ingenuity earlier, especially with housing. He makes a powerful point about this being born purely from necessity.
He really does. He describes houses built from salvaged junk, burnt iron sheets for roofs, old barrels used as wash basins, broken roof tiles forming a stove, even foreign fabric sacks used as tatami covers or bedding.
Patching clothes, making shoes from scraps of wood, rope, bamboo bark.
It's all about making something from absolutely nothing. And he makes this critical philosophical point. Poverty isn't a joke. It's not a moral failing. It's a solemn, serious fact.
These improvisations aren't a performance.
Not a farce, no wait.
Yeah.
They're born purely out of desperate lack, sheer necessity.
And he argues the effort put into these makeshift things, a carefully patched quilt, a mended brazier, actually rivals the skill of famous artisans.
Because the driving force isn't art, it's survival. He contrasts this with the world of wealth, where beautiful, expensive things exist but are completely unattainable for the poor, like flowers in a mirror, moon in the water.
They live in a city full of goods but are like people in a desert.
Exactly, that's his point.
Is there one example of this ingenuity that really stands out from his observations?
Absolutely. He describes these wheeled platforms that disabled people used to get around and try to work.
Made from what?
The most basic materials, old drainage boards, maybe slices of wood for wheels. He points out the immense effort and skill it took just to create these functional mobility devices, compared to the smooth glide of a fancy rickshaw or a bicycle. He compares it to Fukushima Chusa's rough boots, needed for Siberian necessity, drives the design, and often immense effort.
Now, all this survival, this hard work, it required some way to manage money, or really, the lack of money. And Matsubara digs deep into the financial systems of poverty, which sound incredibly complex and often predatory.
Oh, they were. He details the main ways people tried to get by to find some temporary financing user. Mainly pawn shops, shichiya, daily repayment loans, hinashigashi, mutual aid groups, mujinko, and rental shops, sonryoya.
Let's start with the pawn shops, the shichiyas.
They were everywhere, often looked run down outside, but had strong gates, sturdy storage rooms inside, reflecting the wealth they accumulated from other people's desperation. Their main customers were the laborers, the vendors, the artisans.
What were people pawning?
Usually clothes, jackets, leggings, underwear, bedding. But when things got really bad, it could be anything with even a perceived value of 10 cents or more.
Like what?
Cooking pots, kettles, umbrellas, braziers, even rags, cotton scraps, tubs, wheels, clogs, anything they could get a few cents for. And things that were inconvenient for the pawnbroker had much higher effective interest rates.
And the cost wasn't just the interest itself, was it? There was more to it.
No, this is crucial. The official monthly interest was limited, but for small loans, especially under 50 cents, the effective rates were way higher, like 8 cents on a 10-cent loan per month. That's 80% interest.
Whoa.
But on top of that, people were trapped in this constant cycle.
What do you mean a cycle?
They couldn't leave things pawned for long. They might pawn their work scales in the evening just to get the rice pot out for dinner, then pawn their underwear in the morning to get the scales back so they could go work.
So they're constantly juggling.
Constantly. Getting one item out meant pawning something else. And every single transaction incurred a daily fee called shuri of 8 rin or 1 cent.
A fee just to shuffle their own meager possessions in and out.
Exactly. He describes these regulars as sei. Gojiki-san almost like employees of the pawn shop. They were there so often. They might even get tiny informal loans, maybe just handing over a pipe or a towel as nominal collateral for a day.
But paying for it dearly.
They were paying this daily fee, effectively maybe 10-20% of their daily income, just for this constant temporary access to their own stuff. It seems totally illogical, but in their situation it felt unavoidable. He compares the pawnbroker to a customs officer, inspecting their tiny flow of income.
Sounds like a complete trap. And the daily repayment loans, the hinashigashi, they sound even worse.
Yeah, they were incredibly severe. Imagine borrowing 1 yen, but having to pay back 3 cents every single day for 40 days.
Okay.
Or borrowing 80 cents and paying back 2 cents every day for 50 days. Both work out to an effective 20% monthly interest rate. Plus, fees were often deducted up front, so you got less than you borrowed.
And if you missed a payment,
the lender would just rewrite the loan, add penalties, compound the interest. Interest-breeding interest, he calls it.
so you're quickly in debt that just grows and grows.
It was designed, really, to make borrowers lifelong dependents, servants, as he puts it. The lender's profit mechanism was terrifyingly effective because they collected daily. Right from day one, they got their initial capital back super fast.
And then it's all profit.
Pure profit. A tiny starting amount could generate huge annual returns, maybe 7 or 8 yen back for every 1 yen lent over the year.
He calls this rat counting, right?
Yeah, profiting from tiny, frequent transactions. He notes the lenders aren't necessarily committing fraud, they're just diligently applying the harsh rules of the loan. And the borrowers aren't stupid, they're either desperate or just lack the math skills to see the trap they're falling into.
Like cutting flesh with anesthetic.
That's his analogy. The pain isn't felt immediately day by day, but the body, their financial life, is being totally depleted.
So because of all these fees and interest rates, even basic necessities became incredibly expensive for the poor.
Absolutely. They might be buying rice, but after factoring in the cost of pawning things to afford it or the interest on the hinashigashi loan used to buy it, they were effectively paying way, way more than the market price.
That metaphor he uses.
A, burning cassia, boiling jade, usually means extreme luxury, but he applies it to the poor. They were the ones burning cassia and boiling jade just to afford their next meal because of these financial systems trapping them. Those using hanashigashi were eating the most expensive rice in Japan.
And rental shocks, Sunryoya, were another piece of this puzzle.
Yes, renting out clothes, bedding, sometimes rickshaws. Bedding rentals were absolutely vital, especially in winter. Poor families couldn't possibly afford to buy proper winter futons.
So they'd rent thin, patched ones.
For maybe 8 rin to 2 sen per night. Just the basics.
And what was the human cost of that system?
He illustrates the sheer desperation. Families would huddle together under one thin rented futon for warmth, but if they missed even one daily payment of 2 sen,
The owner would take it back.
might come right into their home and take it back immediately, leaving them with nothing for the cold night. He calls it a tearless business. It seems merciless because there's just no room for sentiment or leeway.
And then there's that truly desperate act, renting something just to pawn it immediately.
Yes. Someone might rent a futon for 2 sen a night, then immediately pawn it for maybe 30 sen, a quick lump sum.
But a terrible trap.
A strong strategy, he calls it, but yeah.
Yeah.
It meant they were paying daily rental costs on an item they didn't even possess, just falling deeper and deeper into debt. These tiny debts just snowballed, leading to huge problems, sometimes even crime.
He even documents some truly shocking things people would pawn when they had absolutely nothing else left.
Beyond the usual clothes and tools, he saw people pawning cooked food, potted plants, even live animals, cats, canaries.
And memorial tablets.
Yeah, Buddhist memorial tablets, representing their ancestors. It just shows the absolute extremity of their need.
And that chilling practice of renting children.
Yes, in the world of, as he put it, cunning beggars. Poor families would sometimes rent out their very young children, maybe 2 or 3 years old.
To be used for what?
To be used during ceremonies or festivals to elicit pity and donations. It's just a stark example of how even human life could become a commodity in that desperate system.
Finally, Matsubara looked at the new development areas, the Shinkaicho, that were springing up often on old samurai estates.
Right. Places like Sadakigahara, they were chaotic, bustling, filled with makeshift shops and houses, creating their own unique environment.
What kind of businesses did he see there?
A huge variety, all catering to the poor and working class. Horse meat shops, cheap noodle places, sushi stalls, general stores, fishmongers, junk dealers, secondhand shops, low-class theaters, auctions. He notes the sheer density of them.
Like how many?
In one small area, maybe 6 greengrocers, 7 horse meat shops, 12 secondhand shops, just packed in.
And even the signs were unique.
Yeah, really crude hand-painted signs on cloth or paper, using symbols they thought would appeal to laborers. Gold coins, dried squid, treasure ships, pictures of actors, trying to catch their eye.
Despite all the hardship, was there a different kind of energy in these new areas?
He does note a certain vitality, yeah. Describes it as like goldfish released from water. Maybe there was a sense of hope, starting fresh in a new place away from the older, more established slums.
But exploitation still existed.
Oh, yes. He briefly mentions hearing about disabled people being exploited in awful conditions outside Tokyo, and notes that while maybe not that extreme, similar exploitation by powerful local figures, great monks or ogres, Onyudo definitely happened within Tokyo's poor districts too.
So let's try to bring it all together. What does Matsubara's deep dive into this darkest Tokyo really show us?
Well, it paints this incredibly detailed, almost overwhelming picture of extreme urban poverty in the late 19th century. The constant struggle just for subsistence, the truly unsanitary conditions, the makeshift homes.
And the way those predatory financial systems just trap people, the pawn shops, the daily loans.
Exactly, a cycle of debt that was almost impossible to escape.
But it also highlights this incredible human capacity for ingenuity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Born out of pure necessity.
Absolutely, and the unexpected moments of community, of kindness, found even in the absolute grimmest places. And just the diverse, difficult ways people tried to scrape by day to day.
Matsubara's method itself was pioneering, going undercover, immersing himself.
That's what makes it so powerful. He didn't just report facts. He captured the lived reality, the smells, the sounds, the feeling of those cramped spaces, the texture of salvaged goods, the social interactions. It's this tactile, sensory, deeply human perspective.
Really a foundation for immersive nonfiction.
You could certainly argue that.
So what can we take away from this today? It's history, yes, but it feels relevant. It speaks to human resilience against systemic hardship.
It really does.
Okay.
And it shows that gap, doesn't it, between perhaps well-meaning charity or official policies and the immediate, desperate needs of people on the ground.
These historical struggles, They echo in cities all over the world, even now. Poverty, exploitation.
They certainly do. It's a reminder, I think, that even within systems that seem designed to exploit, people find ways to live, to connect, to survive. They create their own forms of ingenuity, their own communities, often in the most unlikely places.
Well, that was our deep dive into the darkest Tokyo. Thank you for joining us on this, well, challenging but really illuminating journey. Matsubara took us into a world that was so often ignored.
A world of incredible precariousness, constant struggle.
But as you heard, it wasn't just a place of despair. It was also this realm of remarkable ingenuity, resilience.
And that relentless, grinding effort just to survive against overwhelming odds. Odds often made worse, ironically, by the very systems that were supposed to offer some kind of temporary relief.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. Matsubara showed us that even in the absolute most challenging circumstances, humans find ways to adapt, to create, to connect. What unexpected forms of resilience, community, and maybe hidden struggle might be right there in plain sight in our own cities today. If only we knew how to look beneath the surface the way he did.